such sights to show you.
In Search of Darkness is directed by David Weiner and is a 4-hour documentary that takes you into 80s horror. So I heard about this movie back when it was during its Kickstarter phase, and me loving the 80s and me loving horror movies, I immediately bought this. I'll talk about physical releases at the end. But I got them because I pre-ordered them. And so if you just bought it from the Kickstarters they did, or if you bought them on their store, which they only had like sales, so you can only order it in like little time, you got physical releases. So that's how I was able to get them. But this documentary, even though it was 4 hours long, was hands down one of the best documentaries I've seen. And I don't really typically watch documentaries just because the documentaries that I watched I was kind of forced to watch in school, so they were a bit boring. So with documentaries for me, they typically put me to sleep. Not this one. This one, yeah, if you love 80s horror movies and you love knowing about kind of how they were made, or love the people that made them, talk about them, just watch it. Just watch them. They're great. Like they talk to a whole lot of people in this. Like they talk to like John Carpenter, Keith David, Cassandra Peterson, who's Elvira herself. They talk to so many people in this movie. And it's really fascinating, especially for me wanting to be a filmmaker and me loving horror movies and loving media that came out in the 80s. So like movies, music, it's really fascinating to me to see how they actually did this stuff. Because as they pretty much put it, they had almost like freedom to do whatever they wanted. So it was really fascinating to me. And yeah, I loved this documentary. Yeah, and they go into like the soundtracks for movies. They go into like final girl trope, what made like in the horror movies they attracted a stronger male audience because they showed female nudity, and this was before like the internet came out, so there was no like porn. So it attracted a male audience. So it was kind of required for these movies to pull in a stronger audience, and they were kind of pulling in a more dominant male audience. So it's really interesting to just kind of see like why they did this, and yeah, they go into great depth on a lot of them, and they also split up for each year. They talk about like certain movies. So for like 1980, they talk about Friday the 13th. They also talk about like the Halloween sequels. They go into just great depth on all that stuff. So I really enjoyed this documentary. I watched it because it was 4 hours. I haven't like sat down and just like binged that 4 hours. In fact, for both part 1 and part 2, I watched like an hour here and then took a break and then went back and watched another hour. But yeah, I loved this thing, so it absolutely gets it amazing. Then it got really popular with fans that they made part 2. Now with part 2, director David Weiner comes back and does this one. This one is continuing on what they did. So like they talk about more on on the horror movies. So they so like the movies they didn't talk about in like part 1, they talk about here. But with this one, they talk about Italian horror and how they just concepts they had were just crazy. They just went absolutely nuts with the gore and just how crazy it all was. And they get more people involved with this one. Like with this one, they add makeup effects legend Tom Savini. They get Freddy Krueger himself, Robert Englund. So they add a lot more people, but also have people from part 1 come back to do part 2 because they had more footage, and they're like, well, we can make another movie with this. And I'm really glad this wasn't something where it was kind of like they did this because they had like extra footage. Because if so, this easily could have been like In Search of Darkness 0.5, kind of like what like Jackass does. They have extra footage, so they make like 0.5 or 2.5, 3.5, and then now they have 4.5. So I'm glad they didn't do something like that. They actually made like another 4-hour movie on this. So I was very happy with that. And this one was just as good, if not better than part 1. So these were just great. And they are doing part 3. I already pre-ordered that. That one is going to be the end. So this is going to be a trilogy. I also pre-ordered another one that same crew is doing, called In Search of Tomorrow, which is it's about 80s sci-fi movies, which, you know, me being a big sci-fi person, I immediately went out and got this. They are doing another one called In Search of Legends, which is on 80s fantasy movies, but I'm not the biggest fantasy person. Like I've seen like some of them. I've seen like Legend. I've seen Krull. So I have an understanding for it, but to me, fantasy is just not that big for me. So I don't know if I'll get that, but yeah. So who knows? But part 2 is, if not better than part 1, but it's still getting amazing. So with part 1 and part 2, how I got these is I pre-ordered them. So yeah, just immediately when I heard about it, I had to get them. I pre-ordered them and got my name in the credits. So my name is in the actual credits for part 1 and part 2 and the upcoming 3 and In Search of Tomorrow, which I'm very happy for. So that's how I was able to get the physical releases for this. They don't really give you a whole... There's like little extras in these. Actually, in part 1 they have a couple extras, but in part 2 there's like none. These are on... you can watch these on Shudder. Shudder got the rights to these, so it's on there. So if you do want to check these out, I recommend watching them on Shudder, because yeah, I don't think creator VC or crew involved, I don't think they have plans to re-release these. So watching them on Shudder is pretty much the only way you can do that. But highly recommend both of these. Yeah, and I can't wait for part 3. So once part 3 comes out, I'm absolutely reviewing that. So that's my reviews for In Search of Darkness part 1 and 2. Yeah, once I get part 3, because they're in production for that. I did get the digital release for In Search of Tomorrow, so I can watch that. but I want to wait until I get the physical release to actually talk about it. But who knows? I will review that eventually, and then when part 3 of Darkness comes out, I'm absolutely reviewing that. So stay tuned for those if you liked this. If you like the review, like and subscribe. Let me know what other movies, TV shows, or documentaries you want me to check out, and I'll see you next time.